Death. Most of us prefer to avert our eyes at the sight of it, but not artists, oh no. Artists enjoy picking over it. Death has been one of art's great subjects, and art's treatment of it has tended to separate the men from the boys, the great artists from the ordinary ones. Witness the fascination with death of Rembrandt van Rijn. Rembrandt seemed often to have death on his mind. His own, yes, in those doggedly pessimistic self-portraits, but also everyone else's. He painted plenty of the usual dead Christs, hauled up and down the cross like meat at a butcher's. And he painted meat at the butcher's, crucified like a Christ. You wouldn't want to be a bird in Rembrandt's presence, because he only looked at you properly when you were dead. From the beginning, he was haunted by the spectre of the end. Rembrandt produced a couple of the most brazen evocations of death in the whole of art. Above all, there's his strange painting in the beautiful Mauritshuis in The Hague, The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Tulp. It's acknowledged as one of his most powerful works, and the moment you see it, you know you're in the presence of a most unusual masterpiece. 8 curious men, hunched eagerly around a corpse, like a gaggle of illegal gamblers on Tottenham Court Road, captivated by the 3-card trick. Why would Rembrandt want to paint this? It's a dull title, isn't it? The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Tulp. You imagine you're back at school, don't you? At a medical tutorial with a group of eager students keen to learn the secrets of the dissector's trade. But that's not what's going on here. Because the first thing to note about this eerie masterwork is that Rembrandt, in his quest for enigmatic silence, seems to have left out something crucial from this scene. Something very noisy. The audience. A baying crowd of boisterous Amsterdammers, 200 or 300 strong, playing music, munching picnics, would have ringed this gory spectacle and watched the corpse's dismemberment, cut by cut, slice by slice, with great enthusiasm.
The public dissection at the time of the Renaissance were very popular. It was normal that when you got a new girlfriend, perhaps you wanted to marry, to give her a good present, you bought a ticket for the next public dissection to come.
The anatomy lesson in reality attracted many viewers. You had to pay for each single visit, or you could pay per corpse, because the anatomy lesson lasted for 3 days or 5 days, depending on what was there to be explained.
In Holland, in the 17th century, the Dutch, quiet people you would have thought, sensible types not known for their bloodlust or their necrophilia, developed an unprecedented passion for public dismemberment. The dissection of a cadaver, muscle by muscle, limb by limb, became a must-see event. We go to Cats and Starlight Express. The Dutch, in Rembrandt's day, queued for tickets to a corpse cutting.
Well, the painting on the right is the very first painted anatomy lesson we know. Not only Amsterdam, not only Holland, but worldwide. It looks like a sort of festive banquet of civic arts, only the banquet has been replaced by a corpse. The painting on the left is the first anatomy lesson painted where we don't look at an executed criminal's body, but to a little child. This baby seems to be asleep, and it's also holding its own umbilical cord. Like what a little child would do, of course not with the umbilical cord, but with your little finger, for instance.
We're in Rembrandt's house in Amsterdam. This is his bedroom. This is his studio. And this is his prop room. Rembrandt's Cabinet of Curiosities. A collection of curios built up over the years to fire his imagination. In 1669, just before Rembrandt died, an antique dealer came up here hoping to buy the lot and discovered, among the coral and the stuffed beasties, the seashells and the armour, 4 human arms and legs, skinned and floating in glass jars. One of these arms may have served as a model for the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp. If it did, then Rembrandt had been hoarding it for 35 years. Leiden. Not much of a town these days, but in Rembrandt's time, a hothouse of money-making and trade. The Van Ryens, named after the river flowing past their front door, a petite tributary of the giant Rhine, were millers, corn grinders to the populace. Rembrandt was born here, would you believe, in 1606, the 8th of 9 children. Today, his hometown seems perversely determined to ignore him. They've put up a statue that pigeons poo on, and that's about it. All the sign there is in Leiden that Rembrandt's story started here.
At 14, he was sent to university, but soon dropped out. He was going to be a painter, and a cocky painter at that, who outgrew Leiden quickly and moved in 1631 to Amsterdam, where the money was, the clients, the business, and where they commemorate him everywhere these days. And I mean everywhere.
A few months after his arrival, out of the blue, young Rembrandt, the new artist in town, was commissioned to paint a picture by a desperately fashionable Amsterdam GP who called himself Dr. Nicholas Tulp. Dr. Tulp was a self-made man in every sense. Like Rembrandt, he'd come to Amsterdam from Leiden, where he'd studied medicine at the university.
His real name was Klaas Petersen, but he changed it to Tulp when he got to Amsterdam. Tulp, in Dutch, means tulip. This was the era of tulip mania in Holland. The whole country had gone blooming mad.
Tulip mania was the internet boom of its day. Ruthless garden millionaires made their fortunes wheeling and dealing in rare varieties. A single precious bulb could fetch the same price as a house.
There was a tulip carved into the gable of Tulp's new house in Amsterdam. So that's what he began calling himself as he did his rounds. Dr. Tulip, GP to the rich, driving around Amsterdam in a coach emblazoned with tulip designs. It obviously worked as a piece of rebranding, but how good a doctor was he? Well, one of Dr. Tulp's favourite prescriptions was to order his patients to drink 50 cups of tea a day. And if that's impressive medicine, then I'm a PG chimp.
Tulp was a show-off, but that was just as well. A less flashy doctor would surely not have chosen the newest painter in town, a young gun called Rembrandt, just arrived from Leiden, to capture for posterity his great Tulpian performance at a public anatomy lesson mounted in Amsterdam in the winter of 1632 by the Surgeons' Guild.
The Surgeons' Guild consisted of surgeons, not doctors, although in each painting there's always one doctor. He was an academically trained doctor and was appointed by the local government to do teaching of anatomy. The surgeons were organized in a guild, and they were craftsmen, although they had a pretty high esteem of themselves.
It sounds impressive, doesn't it? The Surgeons' Guild. But the surgeons of Amsterdam had to share their guild with tripe producers, clog manufacturers, and skate makers. So they relied on art to separate them from their tripe-producing brothers and to endow them with the grandeur they felt they deserved.
At least once a year, the guild had the right to organize an anatomy lesson. 200 or 300 people must have been present. But the painting, however, only depicts those who were ready to pay for their own portraits. We don't know exactly whether the doctor also painted for his own portrait, but it seems likely. It seems even more likely that the doctor took the initiative to commission the portrait, because it's striking that most of the anatomy lessons were commissioned in or about the year that the doctor was appointed as the prelector of the Surgeons' Guild.
So, Tulp made Rembrandt by choosing him, and Rembrandt responded in kind by immortalizing Tulp as the silent hero at the center of a tense and powerful medical drama. We watch ER starring George Clooney. The Dutch watched this, starring Dr. Tulp.
It's a strange pose. What's Tulp actually doing? Well, his right hand is probing the corpse's arm with some forceps, the skin already taken off, of course, while the other hand is going like that, like a priest blessing his congregation. What's actually happening is that Tulp is lifting a muscle called the flexor digitorum superficialis, located in the proximal interphalangeal joints, and this, as you know, operates the fingers. So with his left hand, he's showing what would happen to the fingers if you moved this muscle. They'd go like that. The students lean over, fascinated, to see exactly what he means.
But Tulp doesn't steal all the limelight here, does he? Much of the credit for the anatomy lesson's riveting presence is due to the deathly white corpse, glowing like ready-brek at the center of the action. Poor guy. All he'd done was try a bit of shoplifting, yet look where it got him.
At the time of the Renaissance, it was very normal that normal people could enjoy looking what is beneath our skin. Something which is not normal today. Those anatomy artists who painted this picture, like Rembrandt, they would nowadays not be allowed. Today, no artist is allowed, whether in England or in Europe, to dissect a cadaver. I think it's a shame. The anatomical theaters between 1550 and about 1850, all over Europe, including London, were mainly small ones. They were usually out of wood, therefore many are not preserved, unfortunately also not in London. They were small because when you want to see something, a real life or a real death in this case, you must be very near to the dissection. The public dissection at the time of the Renaissance were really something.
The anatomy lesson Rembrandt paints actually took place on January the 31st, 1632.
The corpse belonged to one Adrian Adriansson, alias the Kid, a petty criminal who, like Rembrandt, like Dr. Tulp himself, came to Amsterdam from Leiden in search of richer pickings. He'd been caught stealing a coat, and earlier, on the very same day that Rembrandt paints, he'd been hanged from the gibbets on the waterfront, which seems a hell of a price to pay for stealing a coat.
They were not the small criminals, they were really the big guys with a huge record of crime. This was just the last drop that did it.
Though it records a real event, an actual anatomy lesson, the painting can't have been done right there, before the corpse, as it were. In a real anatomy class, the first thing you'd open up is the corpse's stomach. That's where the squishiest and smelliest human bits are housed. And with anatomy classes lasting a few days and no refrigeration at hand, the real Dr. Tulp would certainly not have started with his victim's arm. He would have sliced straight into the guts.
The great death of Adrian Adriansson made Rembrandt famous. As his celebrity grew, so did the size of his commissions. The grandest painter in Amsterdam no longer troubled himself with mere coat snatchers. He was painting Amsterdam's finest, and he was packing them in. It wasn't until 20 years after the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp that Rembrandt returned to the dissecting chamber for a second dose of dismemberment. The anatomy lesson of Dr. Damon. A wonky painting that wasn't wonky once. Once it too featured a large dissecting drama. But half of it was lost in a fire in 1723, including the head of Dr. Damon.
You see the man standing behind the corpse, that's Dr. Damon without the head. He's the assistant to the prelector. I think he's the famous person without a head we know in Dutch art.
The first time I saw the anatomy lesson of Dr. Damon, and I bet you thought this too, I mistook the two halves of the corpse's brain for long hair parted down the middle. The corpse looks just like a dead Christ, doesn't he? The top of his head, handed around like a cup, makes a passable chalice too. Something always nags me about the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp as well. The way those middle-aged students pore over the miraculously glowing corpse reminds me of the adoring shepherds who hurry to the stable in a nativity. What I'm saying is that Adrian Adriansson and Jesus Christ have had the differences between them deliberately blurred. The Kid may have been a no-good coat stealer who met a grim and pitiful death, but Rembrandt's given him a send-off worthy of a god. So the Kid did well out of the picture, but what about everyone else? Well, Rembrandt himself, he fell out of fashion in his 40s, he was bankrupt in his 50s, and he died in hock, aged 63. Dr. Tulp prospered initially. He was the first doctor to describe the anatomy of a chimpanzee, and he went on to become mayor of Amsterdam 4 times. But just recently, he's been outed as a fraud in a clutch of revisionist medical books. His reputation is shot. His imitators mistrusted. The actual building in which the dissection took place, that dark hall looming up above them, is called the Waag these days, and it's a restaurant in the red light district of Amsterdam. But there's something we haven't tackled yet. Remember I said something seemed to be missing from this scene, something crucial, the audience. Well, look more closely.
Follow Tulp's eyes. He's not looking at his students. He's looking out beyond them. Look at the man on Tulp's right. Who's he staring at? At us, of course.
We can't see the missing audience because we are the missing audience. And that man at the top of the pile of students, the one pointing down at Adrian Adrianson's corpse, he's looking at us too. It isn't just the corpse he's pointing at. He's pointing to everybody's futures. There, but for the grace of God, go all of us, is this picture's hidden message. Thanks for the reminder, Rembrandt.
There are a million stories in the world of art. This has been just one of them.